Hey, welcome to Devotionables, brief devotions for busy people. My name is Derek Riley, and today we're continuing in the Gospel of Matthew. As we've been moving through our F260 reading plan together, we've turned the corner from these Old Testament books into the New Testament. So far, we've spent about 7 months reading in the Old Testament, reading about the promises of God and the Lord's commands to his people about how to live. We read the prophecies of how God was going to work and bring about his eternal purposes, and we ended with the expectation of the people as they waited on the Lord. Now, we've crossed that line from Old Testament into New. Christ has come, and for the last week or so, we've been reading and talking about his coming, his incarnation, and his birth, and the beginning of his ministry. For most of this week, though, we're spending our time with the first section of Jesus' teaching. Matthew's gospel account especially punctuates the stories of Jesus' life with major discourses or teaching sections. This section, Matthew 5-7, is the first one of those, the Sermon on the Mount, the first sermon of the new covenant. We don't have time here in Devotionables to read and discuss the whole sermon. We would really have to stretch the meaning of a brief devotion if we were going to cover that. But I want to draw your attention to a few things to notice. Really just a couple of small insights to see as you read through this wonderful sermon over the next few days. First, I want you to see the covenant language in the Sermon on the Mount. This sermon is filled with beautiful Old Testament imagery and language, from the blessed language of the Beatitudes to the salt and light imagery in 5:13-16, to the repeated references to the law and the prophets. There's Old Testament covenant language throughout these chapters, things that should sound familiar to us after spending those 7 months carefully and slowly walking through the Old Testament. And all of that Old Testament language here in the sermon hinges on one fact, that Jesus is the fulfillment of all of it. The law and the prophets all find their fulfillment in him. All of the covenant requirements and all of the covenant promises find their fulfillment here. But they're not fulfilled in our faithfulness, even though faithful living is certainly a major theme of the sermon. The law, the prophet, the covenant promises, they all culminate in Jesus. And in him, everything changes. The second thing I want you to see is how things change in light of Jesus. He doesn't go through and throw out the law and the prophets. He doesn't crumple up the pages we just spent these months reading. Instead, in light of Jesus, all of those things that we read are changed. This is a new covenant in Christ. And with it, we see the promises from the Old Covenant still coming through. Through the prophet Jeremiah, the Lord promised a new covenant, an everlasting covenant. And he promised that in this new covenant, the law would be written on the people's hearts. And that's exactly what Jesus does as he goes through the Sermon on the Mount. He takes old covenant statements and says, you've heard it said. They'd heard this in the law, in the Old Testament. You've heard it said, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not swear falsely. But then Jesus applies those things to the heart. He warns of outwardly showing displays of righteousness, like giving to the poor, or prayer, or fasting. And instead, he applies them to the heart and says that these were never about showing off. They're expressions of a relationship between God and his people. We're to give humbly because God has given so much to us. We are to pray humbly because our prayers aren't about being heard by others, but about the God who hears our prayers. And that brings us to the last thing I want you to see. The Sermon on the Mount is filled with beautiful language about how we relate to God. There are places in the sermon where God is referred to as king, and there's certainly talk of his kingdom several times. But the main way that we hear about God in these chapters is as our Father. 17 times, by just a quick count, Jesus refers to the Father. But not just the Father, your Father. You must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Your Father knows what you need even before you ask him. In the new covenant, because of everything that Christ has done, as he fulfilled the law and the prophets, we have been made children of God who can call him our Father. And living as his children changes everything.